What if I told you that one man became so powerful that he offered to pay off the entire national debt of his country, just to avoid being extradited to the United States? What if I told you that at the height of his power, he was making so much money that rats were eating approximately $1 billion a year in cash that he simply couldn't store fast enough? What if I told you that this same man built his own prison, invited himself to live in it, and continued running his empire from inside, while the government of his country stood helplessly outside? This is not a story from medieval times. This happened in the 1980s and 1990s, within living memory, in a country that was trying desperately to be a modern democracy. This is the story of Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria, the king of cocaine, the most violent, most powerful, and most wanted criminal in the history of the world. And to understand how one man from a small town in Colombia became all of those things, we need to go back to the beginning, back to a country that was already deeply fractured before Pablo Escobar ever fired a single bullet. Colombia in the mid-20th century was a nation in crisis. The country had been torn apart by a period of political violence known simply as La Violencia, a civil conflict between the liberal and conservative parties that lasted from 1948 to 1958 and killed somewhere between 200,000 and 300,000 people. Entire villages were destroyed. Families were scattered. The social fabric of huge parts of the country was shredded. By the time La Violencia ended, Colombia was left with deep wounds, deep poverty, and deep distrust of authority. Particularly in the rural areas and the poor urban neighborhoods where most ordinary Colombians lived, the state was not a protector. It was an enemy, or at best, an irrelevance. It was into this world that Pablo Escobar was born on December 1st, 1949, in the small town of Rio Negro in the Antioquia department of Colombia. His family were not wealthy. His father Abel was a farmer. His mother Hermilda was a schoolteacher. They were respectable, hard-working people who moved to Medellin, the largest city in Antioquia, when Pablo was still young. Medellin in the 1950s and 1960s was a city of extraordinary contrasts. On one side, the wealthy neighborhoods of El Poblado and Laureles, prosperous, beautiful, full of well-dressed people going about comfortable lives. On the other side, the comunas, the hillside slums that ringed the city and housed the hundreds of thousands of poor Colombians who had flooded into Medellin looking for work and opportunity. Pablo Escobar grew up on the edges of this world, not in the deepest poverty. His mother's work as a teacher gave the family a certain stability, but close enough to see what poverty looked like and what it did to people, and close enough to see, from a very young age, the men who had managed to escape it. Not through education, not through hard work, through crime. Escobar began his criminal career as a teenager. He stole cars, he sold contraband cigarettes, he ran small cons. By his late teens, he had developed a reputation in the Medellin underworld as someone with brains, nerve, and ambition. He was arrested several times. The charges rarely stuck. In his early 20s, Escobar became involved in kidnapping, a major source of income for Colombian criminal organizations at the time. He is believed to have been involved in the kidnapping of a Medellin businessman for ransom. The businessman was released. Escobar was not charged. But cocaine was what changed everything. In the early 1970s, cocaine was beginning its transformation from a relatively obscure drug used mainly in elite social circles in the United States into a mass-market commodity with enormous demand. The market was there, the supply routes were being established, and the profit margins were extraordinary. Escobar saw the opportunity immediately. He began as a transporter, moving cocaine produced by others across the border into the United States. He was good at it, He had the organizational skills, the contacts, and the ruthlessness to deal with the inevitable complications. He made money, he made more money, and he began to think bigger. By the late 1970s, Escobar had moved beyond simply transporting cocaine and was controlling entire sections of the production and distribution chain. He formed alliances with other Colombian traffickers, most importantly with the Rodriguez Orejuela brothers of the Cali cartel, though those alliances would later turn into bitter rivalry. Most significantly, he formed the Medellin cartel, along with his partners Jorge Luis Ochoa, his brothers Juan David and Fabio, and Carlos later. Escobar built an organization that would come to dominate the global cocaine trade for over a decade. At its peak, the Medellin cartel was responsible for an estimated 80% of the cocaine entering the United States, 80% of a market that was generating tens of billions of dollars per year. The numbers are almost incomprehensible. Escobar's personal fortune at his peak has been estimated at between 25 and 30 billion US dollars. He appeared on the Forbes list of the world's wealthiest people multiple times. He owned hundreds of properties across Colombia. He had fleets of vehicles, aircraft, and boats. He had a private zoo at his estate, Hacienda Nápoles, complete with hippos, elephants, giraffes, and exotic birds that local children were allowed to visit for free. And he had an army. The Medellin cartel employed thousands of people directly: lawyers, accountants, chemists, pilots, drivers, bodyguards, assassins. It had corrupted officials at every level of the Colombian state: police, judges, politicians, military officers. It had its own intelligence network, its own counterintelligence operation, its own military wing. The military wing was where things became truly terrifying. Escobar's approach to anyone who got in his way was simple and brutal. He called it plata o plomo, silver or lead. You took the bribe or you took the bullet. There was no third option. Those who chose the bullet, or who had no choice, paid an extraordinary price. Escobar is believed to have been responsible for the deaths of over 4,000 people, including 3 presidential candidates, a justice minister, an attorney general, more than 200 judges, dozens of journalists, and over 1,000 police officers. The police officers deserve particular mention. In Medellin, during the height of Escobar's power, he offered bounties for the killing of police officers. Young men from the comunas, desperately poor with no legitimate prospects, could earn more money for killing a cop than they could earn in a year of legitimate work. The result was a wave of police killings that terrorized the city and made law enforcement in Medellin almost impossible. He also used terror on a much larger scale. Bombings, car bombs. The bombing of an Avianca airliner in 1989 that killed all 110 people on board, carried out because Escobar believed a government informant was on the flight. The bombing of the headquarters of Colombia's security service. Attacks on shopping centers and public spaces designed to terrorize the Colombian population and pressure the government into abandoning its extradition treaty with the United States. Extradition was Escobar's great fear. He had no fear of Colombian prisons. He owned the judges and the guards. But being sent to the United States, where his money and his influence could not protect him, that terrified him. He spent enormous resources fighting extradition politically, legally, and through violence. For a time, he succeeded. In the late 1980s, under enormous pressure from Escobar and other cartel leaders, Colombia's government did exactly what he wanted. They abolished extradition. It was a capitulation that shocked the world and demonstrated just how completely Escobar had bent the Colombian state to his will. But the pressure on Colombia from the United States was intense, and Escobar's campaign of terror, while effective in the short term, was generating a backlash. Ordinary Colombians who had once seen him as a Robin Hood figure, he had built houses for the poor, funded community projects, given out money in the comunas, were turning against him as the bombings and the killings claimed more and more innocent lives. In 1991, the Colombian government and Escobar reached a negotiated surrender. He would hand himself in. He would serve a 5-year sentence in Colombia. He would not be extradited. In return, he got to design his own prison. La Catedral, the cathedral, was built to Escobar's specifications on a hillside outside Medellin, overlooking the city. It had a football pitch, a bar, a jacuzzi, luxury furnishings, his own staff. His associates were allowed to visit freely, and the Colombian guards at the entrance, theoretically his jailers, were effectively his employees. He ran his empire from inside La Catedral without interruption. He hosted meetings with cartel associates. He made business decisions. He ordered killings. He continued to oversee the flow of cocaine into the United States. When the Colombian government finally realized the full extent of what was happening and moved to transfer him to a real prison in July 1992, Escobar simply walked out into the Colombian mountains, back to the life he had never really left. What followed was the most intense manhunt in Colombian history. A special unit called Search Block, supported by American DEA agents, CIA operatives, and signals intelligence from the NSA, hunted Escobar across Medellin and the surrounding countryside. He moved constantly between safe houses. He changed his appearance. He trusted almost nobody. He also had unexpected enemies, a group called Los Pepes, people persecuted by Pablo Escobar, formed from the Cali cartel, former associates who had turned against him, and relatives of his victims. Los Pepes waged their own war against Escobar's organization, killing his associates, destroying his properties and his lawyers' offices, and gradually stripping away the network that had protected him. Escobar's world was shrinking. His money was running out. His associates were being killed or captured. His family, his wife Maria Victoria, and their 2 children, Juan Pablo and Manuela, were desperate to leave Colombia but were being used by the authorities to track him. It was a phone call to his family that finally gave him away. On December 2nd, 1993, one day after his 44th birthday, Colombian security forces tracked a call Escobar made to his son and located the safe house where he was hiding in a middle-class Medellin neighborhood called Los Olivos. The search block stormed the building. There was a gunfight. Pablo Escobar was shot multiple times. He died on the roof of the safe house. The manner of his death has been disputed ever since. The official version is that he was shot by security forces. An alternative theory, supported by some of his family members, is that he shot himself rather than be captured. The truth has never been definitively established. What is certain is that when Pablo Escobar died, the era of the great Colombian cartels effectively ended. The Medellin cartel collapsed. The Cali cartel, which had survived and in some ways thrived during the hunt for Escobar, was dismantled by the Colombian government in the years that followed. But the cocaine trade did not end. It never ends. It simply reorganized. Power shifted to Mexican organizations, most notably eventually to the Sinaloa cartel under a man named Joaquin Guzman Loera, a man you might have heard of. Pablo Escobar left behind a legacy that Colombia is still living with today. The violence he unleashed, the corruption he institutionalized, the culture of impunity he created, but also something stranger, a mythology, a legend, a man who was genuinely beloved by many of the poorest people in Medellin, even as he terrorized the country, who built a zoo and opened it to children while ordering the bombing of civilian aircraft, who was simultaneously a monster and a folk hero. His home Hacienda Napoles fell into ruin after his death. The hippos he imported from Africa, 4 of them originally, escaped into the surrounding rivers and have bred into a population of over 100 animals now living wild in the Colombian countryside. They are known as the cocaine hippos. They are an environmental problem that Colombia has no idea how to solve. Even in death, Pablo Escobar is impossible to contain. Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria, the king of cocaine, the most powerful criminal in the history of the world, the man who built his own prison and ran his empire from inside it, the man who offered to pay his country's national debt, the man whose hippos still roam free in the Colombian jungle 30 years after his death. Some stories are too big for any prison to hold.